What's up, guys, and welcome to another video. Today we will be debunking some of the most common myths within the fitness industry at the moment, or at least some of the most common ones, which I believe are just getting in the way of people making significant progress. So in no particular order, the ones that stand out the most to me, starting off with number one, is that you need to do cardio in order to lose body fat. Okay, the truth of the matter is, if you want to lose body fat, there's two ways you can do it. You either do that by consuming fewer calories, or you do that by burning more calories on a day-to-day basis. So let me show you what I mean. This is a representation of how many calories an individual would burn on a day-to-day basis, and this is where it's coming from. Resting metabolic rate, thermic effect of food, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and then actual exercise. Okay, so these two things you can't really change, right? At least in the short run, you can't change your resting metabolic rate or the thermic effect of food. But these two you can. You can change how much exercise you do, and you can change how many calories you burn just moving your body on a day-to-day basis. Now, most people will think, okay, I want to burn more calories, so the only way for me to do that is to just do more exercise. And this usually becomes a little bit problematic because it means either going to the gym more often, which most people don't want to do, or trying to burn more calories in the gym, when really when you're in the gym, the goal should be to actually just build muscle tissue, not maximize calorie burn. Okay, and then going to the gym and just doing cardio just sucks and is usually boring. But yes, ultimately you will burn more calories. Now, what you could do in order to burn the same amount of calories is change how you burn it. So you don't necessarily have to do more exercise. You don't have to go to the gym more often or try and burn more calories in the gym. You can just figure out how, on a day-to-day basis, you can just move your body more. Okay, so this is in the form of just walking around, increasing steps, just bouncing your knee upwards and downwards. Maybe you're taking a call and you're doing steps and walking around the room while doing a call, or maybe you just decide to, walk to work or just stay on your feet and not sit down all day. Okay, so this isn't necessarily directly doing more exercise, but it is a way of moving your body more so that you burn more calories. The next myth is that you need to be consuming an excessive amount of protein in order to build muscle tissue or even just to maintain it. I, for years, used to believe and used to swear by hitting the target of 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, which, when you think about it, particularly the heavier you get, that's a hell of a lot of protein. And that's a lot of meat, fish, eggs, protein powders, which you need to consume in order to hit those targets. And it can be stressful when you think, oh my God, I haven't hit my targets for the day. In reality, the studies have shown that 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight is pretty much all you need in order to build muscle tissue. Anything above that isn't really going to accelerate muscle growth at all. So that's good news. It means you can consume more fats, you can consume more carbs, which realistically are probably going to enhance your performance and your recovery. Now, it is worth saying, the older you get, protein requirements might be more. And if you're in a calorie deficit, protein requirements might be a little bit higher. So overall, I would say it's probably better to be on the safe side and maybe overconsume protein just a little bit as an insurance policy, just in case you were in a situation where you did need to consume more protein. But for the vast majority of people who just want to look athletic, they want to put on a bit of size, 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight is going to be absolutely fine. Another huge myth is that you need to be sore after your sessions. You need to experience a pretty significant amount of delayed onset muscle soreness. Otherwise, the session was just not good enough and you need to try harder next time, which is not true. In fact, you can make progress, lift heavier weights, get bigger and stronger without actually needing to experience the soreness at all. That's actually a good indicator that your programming is on point and you're not doing excessive volume, excessive reps, sets, drop sets, and so on. Okay, the thing is with soreness, if you experience too much of it, it basically means it's taking that muscle longer to recover. Okay, so it's more time until you can actually train that muscle group once again. And on top of that, it's just straight up uncomfortable because you feel like you're walking around like a cripple. Nobody likes training legs and not being able to walk properly or sit down 5 days after the session. Okay, so actually doing fewer sets, maybe fewer exercises in a particular session, but still trying to lift as heavy as possible, and each week lifting heavier, means that the soreness will actually be reduced, but you will still be making progress. The next myth is that you need to cut your carbs if you want to reduce body fat percentage. If you're going to go on a cut, the best way to do it is just eliminate your carbs. Well, that's not entirely true. So let me give you an example of what I mean. This is an individual who's consuming 3,000 calories at the start of a cut, and they want to lose body fat, but they are convinced that you can only lose body fat by cutting the carbs. What ends up happening, by reducing the carbs drastically from their diet, they end up cutting a significant amount of calories from their intake. Now, of course, this will give you results, but often you end up dropping your calories drastically in a very short period of time, which is certainly not advised at the start of a cut. Okay, they don't increase their fats and they don't increase their proteins, they just cut their carbs. There's a huge deficit, and usually what this means is there's a massive drop in performance in the gym. They get weaker, recovery is slower, the muscles are less full, and then they end up having these pretty aggressive cravings, okay, because of the elimination of carbs, and they're not replacing the fats. This is what I would do, a person who is trying to maintain muscle mass and lift as much as possible, stay full, stay satiated. I would just drop my fats a little bit. I would keep my carbs exactly the same, keep protein the same, and just drop the fats. And you can see we're in a deficit, and that is all we need in order to lose body fat. Of course, as you want to continue dropping calories, I wouldn't recommend eliminating fats because you need the fats. Okay, so once you get to a certain point where it doesn't make sense to drop fats any further, then you can start dropping the carbs a little bit. I wouldn't recommend dropping protein. If anything, protein may need to increase a little bit, but you shouldn't be eliminating or dropping carbs drastically at the start of a cut. Just over time, you want to look at very gradually reducing fats, carbs, allowing yourself to be in a calorie deficit, but not an excessive calorie deficit, especially to begin with in this example. The next myth is to do with training to failure. A lot of people seem to think if you want to grow, you want to build muscle tissue, you have to push yourself and train to failure on every single set. This is not true, okay? For the majority of people, beginners, intermediate lifters, and even experienced lifters, you don't need to do that. The true indication of progress in building muscle tissue is progressively overloading on a week-to-week basis. How can you increase the mechanical tension in the exercises which you're doing? The best way to do that is just lift a little bit more each week, okay? The problem with pushing to failure, two things. First of all, when you push to failure, the risk of injury is much higher. And this goes for everyone. Even if you're an advanced lifter, okay, if you just have one slip of concentration, the risk of injury is very high. If you're a beginner intermediate lifter, you don't have the experience or the mastery of exercise execution, so you often can't control the weight and will not have your form in check and end up doing damage, okay, an injury. That's the absolute worst thing for you. The second point is the fatigue and the muscle damage that's caused from going to failure too frequently, okay? If you were to push to failure on every single set, you're going to be much more fatigued in comparison to somebody who has 1 to 2 reps in reserve. So what does that mean? You need longer periods of rest and recovery in between sessions. If you, like me, find it very hard to not push to failure, then what would make sense would be to taper down the volume. Okay, so do fewer working sets per session, per week. And that way, if you do push to failure, this is like seriously pushing to failure, then you're not going to be doing as much damage and causing as much fatigue because you're not doing it as often. Let's say, for example, if you're pushing to failure and doing that in 3 to 4 working sets per exercise. Okay, so it is relative, it is kind of dependent upon the individual and what their idea of failure is, but you don't need to do it in order to progress. So don't think, just by literally shaking on those last repetitions, borderline letting the weight drop on your face or causing major injury, you don't need to do that, okay? Just track your progress, the weights you're lifting, and the goal each week should be to lift more. Another common myth which people believe is that whenever they're cutting and trying to lose body fat, they need to increase the reps that they're doing for each exercise they do in the gym. They think, well, if I do more repetitions, then I'm going to burn more calories, and this is what I want to do because obviously I'm losing body fat. But this is actually the opposite of what you want to do, okay? If you are doing more repetitions, you cannot lift the same amount of weight for more repetitions. What you're actually doing is you're reducing mechanical tension. You're going to actually accelerate the amount of muscle tissue which you lose and strength which you lose because of this reduction in weight which you're lifting. And of course, you combine that with fewer calories, it's going to accelerate even further. So when you're in the gym, focus on preserving as much muscle tissue as possible, size, strength. Of course, when the calories are in abundance, you can focus on really growing, but ultimately, if you're in a deficit, the focus should be to preserve that strength and that size. So in order to do that, you still try to lift as heavy as possible. You don't start messing around with the rep ranges, you still keep them on the lower end. If anything, I would probably advise maybe reducing the reps a little bit so that you can maintain that size and strength while still lifting as heavy as you can possibly lift. Obviously, you won't be as strong, you may need to reduce the weights a little bit, but ultimately you want to try and keep them as high as you possibly can do to give signals to your body that, hey, we are still shifting this weight, so I still need you to hold on to this muscle tissue, I still need you to hold on to this size, because we're still doing the work, right? Outside of the gym, you focus on creating this calorie deficit either by manipulating your calorie intake or by just moving your body more neat, as I've mentioned before. The next myth is to do with bulking and cutting, and how if you want to build muscle tissue, you need to bulk. Okay, you need to be in a pretty comfortable calorie surplus on a day-to-day basis in order to build muscle tissue. And that's not actually true. If you just want to build muscle and get stronger, you can do so by pretty much staying at maintenance level or very slightly above that. Let me show you what I mean by this. Here we have a graph representing two individuals who are putting on muscle tissue over an extended period of time, usually years. I'm taking the example of an intermediate lifter who's been lifting for years, not an absolute beginner. So if we take the person in blue, this is someone who has been consuming maintenance calories consistently, or maybe just above maintenance, but ever so slightly, and they are gradually putting on muscle tissue over time because there is enough calories which they're consuming in order to do that. Of course, let's assume that they're progressively overloading every week and they're sleeping and everything outside of the gym is also on point. Now, if we take another individual who also is doing everything in the gym and outside of the gym identical to this other person in blue, but the calorie intake is different, look what happens. Here, they will start to put themselves in a pretty significant calorie surplus. I'm talking about like 500 calories or more above maintenance. Notice how they don't actually put on more muscle mass at a faster rate, because that's just not possible. But what happens is when they get to around about here, they realize, oh, I'm actually like quite fat now. I've accumulated a lot of fat during this bulk phase. Now I need to cut to bring my body fat percentage down again. But what they don't realize is when they're cutting for weeks at a time or months at a time, because they're in a calorie deficit, it's actually a lot harder to build muscle tissue. So they notice that their strength goes down, and because of this deficit they actually start to lose size, and then they get to a point where they're like, hey, my body fat percentage is now at a point where I'm happy once again, probably where it was at the start. Then they go and start this bulk again, where they pack on the calories and put way more calories into their diet than they need to. So again, they're building muscle tissue at the same rate as the person in blue, but it gets to a point where once again they get too fat, and then like, hey, I need to go into a deficit once again to get my body fat percentage down. So the same thing keeps happening. They're in periods of building muscle tissue when they're in a surplus. Because they're in such a significant surplus, it gets to the point where they get too fat and they need to reduce their calories, go on a cut in order to bring the body fat percentage down again. So they keep repeating that. But notice, because there's these periods of building and then losing muscle, over the long run, if you take this finish line point, they are actually, in terms of muscle mass, a lot smaller in comparison to the person who was just consistently eating the exact amount of calories which they needed to be eating. And we can assume that at this point here, both individuals are at the same percentage of body fat. So there you have it. Those are some of the biggest myths which I believe are causing the most confusion and preventing people from actually making progress. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel and check out all the other videos on Mike Thurston Coaching channel. And of course, if you are in need of proper programming where you don't have to literally spend all day, every day in the gym, wasting your time, Thirst app can cater for all of your needs, all of your goals and experience levels. It's something which I've been using over the past 6 years, and without a doubt, the more I use it, the more progress I make. So make sure you head over to thirstapp.com or just download the app in the App Store, and I'll see you guys on the inside.